The first time, this is actually the first time I've ever stood up and given a full message, and one that I had to go out and seek and find and learn for myself. So it's been quite a past 60 days. But I guess before I really get started tonight, there's a couple things I guess that I wanted to go over. And I want to thank everyone who's been coming to those. Anytime you've been here, especially anytime that you've stood up here and shared. I haven't actually stood up here and shared at that time. I even did a while, I didn't really share anything. Right, Ladonna? I'll maybe give you some insight into my life, but I didn't really share the whole time. So, I believe that Moses, is not just a group of people that came together, to serve and give, but we're together, we're here in this room, we're ministry because, well, just for that, because we're here to minister to each other. And so, all the things that you've shared with me and with each other and for yourselves, I hope you found great comfort in that, because it's been fascinating to me to live through that with you. And I think that the real, Derek was even saying, why are we here? What are we doing? I think we're here to minister to each other, and that's for me, that's really what M.O.S.E.S really is. So, but tonight I want to share a little bit of testimony and talk to you about what God's been doing in my life. Even recently. And there's some really cool things, and when you start to give it up and trust in God and walk closer, you start hearing things, you start listening, and you start hearing God talking to you, and you start living things that you hear other people talking about, that you don't have great relationships spiritually. So, God's really showed up in my life, and last week I want to tell you that Shannon talked about Leviticus in his opening, and got some pretty cool stuff there. He talked about Leviticus in when he opened last week. I don't know if everybody remembers about that, but I went home that night and kind of struggled with what he had said in a couple places. And so I started looking at the overall book of Leviticus and how it fit into my message, because I knew it was somewhere in there. And if you look at Leviticus, it was kind of written, well, it was written as a guidebook of the times, right? How to live your life holy, right? It was step by step what to do for all circumstances, right? Sacrifice this way, sacrifice that way, offering here, burn this, eat that, right? And he told you exactly what to do. So, as you read through Leviticus, Leviticus 19:2, is that even on the list? No.
You're fitting right in.
As I'm backing out of the driveway, I'm going to text Jerry some stuff before I come here. It says, be holy. Because I, the Lord your God, am holy. And, we don't really need more excuse, but it provides the specific directions. And it provides us a roadmap. And Shannon talked last week about Leviticus 26, pretty much 1 through 3 and 26:10. But, Jerry, by the way, whenever you're getting up here to speak and Jerry gets up here and the first thing he does starts talking about listening to false prophets and all these types of things, it doesn't increase your confidence in anything that you prepared
that too. I was
at
like,
all.
wow, way to set the
Right? So thank you for that confidence.
I'm lost. That's okay.
Leviticus 26, though, 26:1, it says, don't make idols or set up image or sacred stone for yourselves. Do not place a carved stone in your land or bow down before it. I'm the Lord your God. Observe my Sabbaths and have reverence for my sanctuary. I'm the Lord. If you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, I will send you rain in its season, and the ground will yield its crops, and the trees their fruit. Your threshing will continue until the grape harvest, and the grape harvest will continue until planting, and you will eat all the food you want and live in the safety in your land. And if you follow down to 26:10, it says, really kind of the message that Shannon ended with in his opening last week, which says, you'll still be eating last year's harvest when you have to move it out to make room for the new, right? And that was really the promise. You look at these guys and the Israelites as they were doing this. The book of Leviticus was really written when they were wandering through the desert, right? And so these guys had witnessed tons and tons of miracles, think about it. If they were coming from Egypt, all the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, everything that's going on, right? And yet they were still able to fall back quickly, within just a short amount of time, fall back quickly and start looking at, false idols and doing things like that. And I guess when I'm looking at this, how is this possible, right? I mean, idolatry in its own right is when we make things more important than God, right? And so today, Jerry was talking about something certain, but the idols that we contend with today, right? And they're not the golden calves, they're not things like that, right? But they're things like our success, our looks, our money, and these are false gods that promise everything that you want, but give you nothing that you need, right?
Amen.
So, these are, I'm studying this whole thing, right? So really so I'm talking about this message on Thursday morning, right? Over coffee with some guys that I meet with on Thursdays and work on some other areas. And, I basically worked through some things, and I just basically at that point in time chose that I was going to just receive that message wholly, right? And that's a lot to think about, that you'll still be eating last year's harvest when you have to move it out and make room for the new, and really trusting God that you're going to accept that as the peace. As we're going through, it's about 2 hours later when a couple, I don't know, was it 2 hours later? I don't know if you were there.
2 hours.
About 2 hours later, a couple sits down next to us, right? Nothing special. Drinking coffee, eating cinnamon rolls. No indication of being anybody. I know that they were kind of listening in on our conversation probably, and then an opportunity arose a little bit later for one of us. Asked the lady, do you go to church? Right, the man that was with her had gotten up to
the restroom.
go to the restroom or get coffee or whatever he was running around doing. And she was looking over at us, and Barry asked her. She said, "You go to church?" And the lady said, "Well, yeah, I go to this church, right?" Of course, Gary knew people that went to that church, so we asked about that. Shocker. And she didn't know them or whatever. And Gary reached in and he handed her a walker, and he said, "I want you to have this." We said you take notes in church, and the conversation ensued. He said, "I want you to have this." Well, at that point in time, the husband comes back to the table, or man, I'm not sure if it's, I don't know what it was, son, husband, good time. Comes back to the table, and he's very interested in the walker, in the book, right? And it's like, "Well, what is this?" And it's like, "Well, write that website down before you give it back to me, right?" And no, it was a gift. It was given to you, right? It was a gift. And so the conversation continued for a few moments there, and so I'm going to stop the story right there and back up real quick, right? Normally in the mornings I'm very rushed. This morning I was very non-rushed, right? So I felt like I had more presence about me to gather my thoughts on the way to our meeting and really pray before the meeting started, right? Something I try to do, but usually it's a little quick prayer, when you're done, right? Like, I didn't have time. Oh, pray quickly. Oh, okay, that was good. Oh, God help me, I'm done, right? So,
That's fair, my family.
yeah, hey, quick prayer is better than no prayer, but when you have some time and you're really thinking about it and you're really praying about these things to go well and to provide us with, the things we need to move our projects forward and just the signs and help us, help us, right? Help us understand where we're supposed to be going. So not this last thing it does in Oklahoma, but the one before. Wednesday or Thursday before that, I was sitting in with Janie in my front room, just talking late at night, and we were having some conversation about us in our relationship and kind of where we've come from over the past few years, which is a long way. And one of the things that we were talking about was forgiveness. And so, I just basically, I can give my 2 cents on forgiveness, that's fine. But in this case, I knew that I needed to be a husband to my wife, and this is not an area that I could minister to her in, right? This wasn't for me, right? Because the forgiveness was really for, probably toward me, right? So beware, there you go, beware the false prophet there, right? Hey, just forgive me, it's good. No, but this was an area that, I said, listen, I can't be your minister on this, and that, somebody else will have to give you this message. Almost verbatim to that, right? When I show up to church on Sunday morning and sit down, and Pastor Barney comes in, lo and behold, he goes, he's talking about true forgiveness. I wouldn't even look to my left. She was trying to get my attention too. so, I mean, there's just some really great testimony in my life right now. I could go on and on and on for days, but God is moving in not only my life, but in our life. We attribute that to having a spiritual relationship that's building and that we're growing, and it's fascinating. And I know that it's there for everyone. So, 60 days ago, Derek came up to me after church, and I believe the exact words he said were, God's not wasting time. He didn't say my time or your time. He said, God's not wasting time. And I'm like, and you'll be giving the message of Moses in 60 days. I was really kind of shaken up by it a little bit because, as I look at myself, where I've come from and who I am and what I've done.
You should have said when you volunteered, now nobody's going to look at me in church.
Yeah, I know.
Jerry's coming walking out of their way.
I'm staring. Run!
You like the target that's
Yeah. We just talked about that, right? Oosh, yeah. Derry's coming. Woo. Dry land, find someone. Hey, so he says God's not wasting time, and so I began to kind of go through a process, and immediately I began to think of myself as not the person who could really or should be standing here giving you the message, right? Begin to use condemnation on ourselves and go through these things, and it's easy to do, and so the first thing I kind of had to do is roll through just the acceptance of God's plan for me, right? And where I'm at, and what my role is going to be. And I had to accept that I was going to trust in God, that I was the guy to stand here and give this message, of which I'll get to in a minute. I almost looked at Derry really though and said, are you sure? Me? But I was able quickly to accept that, and you can ask yourself, why would God want to deal with me? Insert your own name there, right? Well, as I looked at that question and I began to find the answers to that question, I looked at what kind of people did Jesus deal with, okay? And he dealt with some pretty low life kind of guys, tax collectors, criminals, fishermen, rich, poor, as well as those who loved him or those who hated him. He dealt with all kinds of people. And in Matthew 9 through 13, is that one?
Yes.
All right, I got a couple of them. Let's see, 9 through 13. It kind of goes to tell you a little bit about what kind of people Jesus was dealing with and what some of the sentiment was. But it says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. He said, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and followed him. When Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Now, on hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go out and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners." God is, I guess the real what I'm trying to say is that, Matthew became really the bridge for Jesus to reach out to his past associates, right? His past associates were other tax collectors, were other sinners, were people like him. And the message is that we should not be afraid to reach out, to people that are in sin, because we know God's message is not only going to change people, but also it's going to change their minds. And the religious leaders, they constantly tried to use this against Jesus and question him, on why he was hanging out with these types of people. And, they were more concerned, these religious leaders were more concerned about themselves and their reputations, right, than they were about really helping others. And so, in the Christian life, Derry touched about it earlier. We started talking about, that it's not a popularity contest. And if we follow Jesus' example, we know that we should share the gospel with everyone. And this is an opportunity for me to start sharing with you today. And, it doesn't matter whether they're poor, whether they're moral, whether they're lonely, whether they're an outcast, whether they're rich, moral, popular, or powerful, right? And I've probably done all of those things. All of those things myself. It doesn't really matter. In Hosea 6:6, he talks about, a ritual is helpful only if it's carried out with an attitude of love or obedience to God. I think we've talked about that before. If your heart's far from God, rituals are meaningless, right? You really think about it. You think about when this guy was around. This is 750 BC, right? They're already talking about, rituals being meaningless. This guy was listening to God, right? That could not have been popular for him to say that at the time, right? We're talking about sacrifices, burnt offerings, and all types of things that are happening. This guy's talking about, hey man, your heart's not in it, those things mean nothing. What? It says right here in the book of Leviticus that if I do this, all I need to do is burn a calf and offer some of it up, right? And so this guy's talking about stuff that's like, whoa, what do you mean it's meaningless? Like, all I got to do is do these things, right? Well, let's just put it like this. Here I'm going to get to my message now, right? And she just talking about, I got the download today. Well, there was no download for Jeff Day, right? When I say you have to go through a process sometimes, it is a process. And thank God he didn't say in 6 days, because the message would have been over by this time, right? All the things that I told you up to this point would not even have happened yet. So it would have been totally different. Go through a process, and Shannon's getting downloads, and I'm getting, we're talking in the same language. I'm getting bits. We talking gigabytes today, like it's nothing. I'm talking in bits. Nobody even knows what that is. He's on hard drive. I'm on 5 1/4 floppy disk. It's in a tape drive somewhere on a Commodore. But he did give me the title pretty quickly. I was able to come up with the title. I knew that I was going to talk about, recalculating our lives, making a U-turn and turning around. But I had no idea what message went with it, right? And that was really the search. There were some other title considerations that came along with it, which was Numbers 22 and 21 about Balaam's donkey. And Derry once kind of stood up here and talked about the ass delivering the message. So the ass delivering the message was another consideration of the title, but I went with make a U-turn, recalculating. It just seemed better. Yeah, more G-rating. Sorry, folks on
I beat it.
but read Numbers 22, 21, it's great, you'll love it. Right. And look back at some of the history and you'll watch and see Derry's message on that. So the GPS, right? It's a global positioning system. And when we're out, we're on a trip, we're driving somewhere, even in Wichita, I still use it because I want to know how long it takes me to get there. And I'm talking on my phone all the time anyway. And all of a sudden, you miss your turn, right? What's it tell you to do? It says recalculating.
Bye, guys.
It says recalculating, right? Make a U-turn, right? And the first time it said make a U-turn, we all started laughing. You drive down the road, you miss a turn, and it says make a U-turn. You're like, whoa, what is that about, right? Or it says make a right here, turn here, do something different. You're off path, right? You're off path. Well, how far do we go really before we start to listen to the correction of those directions? You know what I mean? Do we make that turn there? Do we keep going? Because if we keep going, it does something else. It says, hey, recalculating, turn here, get off on this exit, right? Make a right-hand turn, make a left-hand turn. We miss that turn, and then it says, recalculating, and we keep going, right? Or when we make that right-hand turn, and we get to the next intersection, it tells us what to do, right? We don't really know where we're at this point in time.
But it never gives up.
But it's never good. It just keeps giving it to you. It keeps going, recalculating, right? There are videos on YouTube where people are smashing their GPSs because they're tired of hearing it, right? Well, the other types of GPS, is our God positioning system, right? And so when our God positioning system is talking to us, the same question is posed. How far are we going to go before we start correction, before we start listening to those directions, right? Before we start hearing what God is telling us, right? And that's really where the whole message kind of came from, is listening to God in our GPS. Sometimes we're not even physically moving away from God, right? Sometimes the listening and the moving away is happening on the inside. It's not even something that we're physically running away. It's that we're dealing with something on the inside. We know we need to make correction, and we know that God's talking to us. He's telling us to recalculate. He's telling us to turn right. He's telling us to do something different. Sometimes we just don't listen, or we're not sure. It's not feeding like feeding the homeless guy from Wendy's. Don't feed Wendy's though. They eat at Denny's, right? But when your GPS says make a U-turn, there's one thing that doesn't happen, and I'm going to tell you that it doesn't send you back to the start place, right? It doesn't send you back to the start place. What it does is it tells you from where you're at right there on what to start doing. And it gives you a new point of beginning, right? It recalculates, new point of beginning, and then starts to correct. And so, as I was looking for scripture to, start backing up what it is that I'm talking about, I even told Dara this a while back, is that, I felt like I was supposed to be reading in the book of Kings. Well, it wasn't in the first book, but in the second book, where it starts talking about, it mentions the prophet Jonah and some things which led me, just the listening to God part, saying that Jonah is the part, right? Now you've searched it out. You've done what I've told you to do. I'll give you the next part. That's the bit, right? Not the download. So when you go into the book of Jonah, I'll read it. Actually, the first Jonah. I think I have the book of Jonah. In Jonah 1 through 3, it starts out like this. It says, one day long, this is out of the Message. It says, one day long ago, God's word came to Jonah. Amitai's son, who's Anita's son, I guess, up on your feet and on your way to the big city of Nineveh. Preach to them. They're in a bad way, and I cannot ignore it any longer. But Jonah got up and went the other direction, to Tarshish, running away from God. He went down to the port of Joppa and found a ship headed to Tarshish. And he paid the fare. He went on board, and he was joining those going to Tarshish, which we can say that sometimes, as far away from God as he could get. So God said, go here and do this. And Jonah said, I'm going to run away. Literally. Physically running away at this point, right? Physically running away at this point. There's a lot going on the inside, too, at the same time. But he's physically running away at this point. And so, what Jonah's going to find out here really quickly is that it probably would have been better to obey God from the start. Would have been easier. But we had to go through a lot, so in order to make that happen. Got a great case on it. In verse 4, God sent a huge storm, right? And so Jonah's disobedience to God is starting to endanger the lives of the people around him, right? As opposed to add to it. And we all have a responsibility to obey God, right? And when we don't obey God, our disobedience can have an impact on others around us. It's as simple as some of the stories we've heard in here or heard in church, Hey, God told me to go give this amount of money. God told me to give that guy $100, right? God said this. I'm listening to God and I'm in obedience, right? Our disobedience, can have an impact. If you don't give that to somebody, or if you don't do what God's asking you to do, you have to consider how it's going to impact others. And as the story progresses, right, the huge storm puts the ship in great jeopardy. It's going to break into pieces. The sailors that were on the ship are terrified. It was a big ship, and I don't know how many people were on it. It doesn't really say. But they begin to call out in desperation, right, to their gods. They start throwing stuff overboard. This must have been a bad storm. I can't imagine it was a normal storm, right? They're trying to lighten up. And meanwhile, Jonah, right, decides to slip down below and take a little nap. I don't attribute this to the same type of nap that Jesus would take when the storm was rough, right? But Jonah's just basically, he's down taking a nap, ignoring his reality, right? He's choosing to go ahead and just basically say, I'm just not going to deal with this. I'm going to go down below, sleep through the storm and see what happens. But God didn't let it go with that, right? He says, I'm recalculating because I need you someplace, Jonah, right? The sailors on the ship, in verse 7, they begin to cast lots, right? I don't know if anybody knows what that is. Anybody know what that is? Like drawing straws, right? Casting lots. I don't know how many people are on it, but if we cast lots in this room and draw the short straw, yeah, odds are pretty good you're not going to get the short straw. You know? Pretty good. But not when God intervenes, right? Because again, we're recalculating here, right? We just have to start listening to God because we need you someplace and we're going to get you there one way or the other. And this was definitely an intervention, right? This was a God intervention, casting lots and Jonah being called out. So they brought him up, you know, the captain went down, probably kicked him around and said, get up, you lost. And we need to hear from you. What's going on with you? Well, he begins to tell them the story that he's ignoring. God asked him to do something, and they're like, which God? You know? And Jonah tells them, the God of the earth and land and the God of the seas, right? And so they really start to question him a lot. And the seas begin to get rougher. And Jonah tells them, hey, to calm the seas, just throw me overboard. Just throw me overboard, right? Simple. I solved your problem. I solved my problem because you threw me overboard. I don't have to go to him anymore, right?
You think it was suicide? He was thinking suicide?
And he was solving his problem. I don't want to go to Nineveh. There's a big storm here. Hey, if you guys throw me overboard, it's kind of on you. Right? It's on you. It's not on me. You threw me overboard. They didn't do that. They tried to then start to oar the boat back to shore, right? Let's just get to work on this thing, right? They'd already thrown the cargo off, which is what they were getting paid to ship from one place to the other, right? Then they still didn't throw him over, right? They were rowing the boat. Again, God says, I'm going to recalculate. GPS goes off. Recalculate. I'm going to make the storm and seas rougher yet. Then the sailors were like, oh, God, please don't hold us responsible. This is your will, right? This is your will, God. So God, then they picked up Jonah and they chucked his rear overboard, right? Chucked him overboard. But then God's using this point now. God's using Jonah's point in time here still, because after that, the sailors then started making vows to God, right? They started to follow God because they were fearful and they saw His power, right? So it's not, it's God's using Jonah still where he's at today. God's using us where we're at today. We're recalculating. We're starting a new beginning point right now. And Jonah starts right now because he just got chucked into the ocean. Immediately it says, seas, calm down. Right? So you don't figure that Jonah just drowned right there, or would have, right? He's probably swimming away or floating there, Seas calm down immediately. Now Jonah's there, the boat's going away, and we're like, woo, chucked you over, thanks, brother. And then a big fish comes up and swallows him up. Now, come on, they hadn't seen this, right? Nobody saw that? They're like, man, that dude just got swallowed by a fish. Now my vows of God becoming stronger, right? Because if he can swallow him with a fish, he can swallow our whole boat with a fish. You know what I mean? I'm working on this thing. I'm crazy scared. I guess back in 12 though, is getting swallowed by the fish. What we learn about Jonah though is that, first of all, you can't go two directions at the same time. Before Jonah could return to God, he had to change his direction, right? He had to make a U-turn. And, we ask ourselves, as we're traveling in a direction, we're trying to go in multiple directions, or if we're not returning to what God's called us to do. I found the scripture, I was wondering, what has God told me to do? What has God told me to do? And the scripture that I found to kind of really back this up is in 1 John 2, 3 through 6. It says, we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the trust is not in that person. But if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in them. This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. Right, so when we ask ourselves, what does God ask us to do? Are we following that message? Are we doing these things? What does God ask us to do? And are we doing it faithfully? And Jonah was willing to give up his life for the sailors, right? This is what I find strange. Jonah was willing just to say, throw me overboard, save yourselves, right? But he wasn't willing to go to Nineveh to save God's people there, right? And, Jonah knew the whole time the storm and everything was his fault. He knew without question. And he wasn't going to say anything. He was ignoring reality. He was ignoring his purpose until they cast lots and they called him out. Right? At this point, we're really beginning to see things about Jonah that we really probably don't like. And in many cases, he might remind us of ourselves at some point. And we're all capable, of putting on the show of obedience, I guess. But God can be just as blunt with us as he came with Jonah, right? God was straight up with Jonah, right? He didn't pull punches. I need you to go to Nineveh. And sometimes God's really blunt with us. He has a way of disrupting our comfort, our zone, and taking us out of our comfort zone and putting us in a place to meet him. And Jonah tried to listen to God's calls, but God disrupted his comfort zone, pulled him out of it, because he needed him to make a U-turn. He needed him to recalculate. He needed him to go to Nineveh. And he didn't want to go. So Jonah's swallowed by the fish, and sometimes life is good. We take God for granted. But then things get bad, and we start to lose hope, and we start to cry out, and we start to pray for God, right? And this is what's happening in the second chapter of Jonah. When we do this ourselves, it leads us to an inconsistency in our spiritual life, right? We're happy when we're happy because it's our doing good, right? And we're unhappy when things aren't going good, and we start to blame God for this, right? As opposed to living our life for God, which is giving God credit for all things, right? When we give God credit for all things, it enhances our spiritual life. It's no longer an inconsistency of that spiritual life. And Ecclesiastes 7:14. This is something that Derry showed me a couple weeks ago. That was another piece of my bits and downloads for my message. If I can find it. Does anybody have 7:14?
They have blown the trumpet and made everyone ready, but no one goes to battle, for my wrath is on all their multitude. Wait, sorry, Ezekiel. Next.
Ecclesiastes. Okay, I got it right here. 7:14. It says, "When times are good, be happy, but when times are bad, consider this: God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, no one can discover anything about the future." Right? Right. This is something we were talking about. Consider this, right? God made the good times and the bad times. We give ourselves credit for a lot of the good things that we do, and we blame God for a lot of the bad things, or maybe we have throughout our life. God was part of our life, and we didn't really know who we were blaming. We were blaming somebody for that. Right? Sometimes God uses the bad times to drive us back to him. Sometimes, when we look back, the positive things in our life have come from the struggles in our life. I've heard testimony from people in here about the struggles that they had in their life. Shannon talks about his time in prison, but look at the blessing that his time there has brought to him. Right? There's a lot of us who may not have actually been to prison, but we've been in prison, right? Okay, and our prisons are out there, and for whatever they are, whether it's our money, ego, looks, success, the things that are holding us back, we're all have been in prison at some point in time. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of us I have. And I think that in general, we just don't always know what we've come through until we've really kind of been through it. So, in chapter 3, Jonah starts to recalculate. He gets out of the whale, right? And God tells Jonah again what to do. He tells him very specifically, listen, go to Nineveh, I need you there, go there now, right? And he does. He goes there, But he didn't go there with grace in mind, right? I mean, he said he goes there, a city of 120,000. Took him 3 days to go through the city, and his message to them was, in 40 days, you will be smashed, right? You're done, right? So he's preaching the good word on the corner, you know what I mean? He's going through town, he's like, hey, in 40 days, you're over with. God is tired of you. It is over. And he had a smile on his face because he did not like them.
Right.
He hated them. That's why he didn't want to go there in the first place. So he's what happened though is that the people started to listen to him and to listen to God's word. And they started to make a U-turn. They started to recalculate, and they started to make changes. Instantly, they're wearing things they did back then, the sackcloths and tearing the robes and going on fasting and sacrificing and doing things they wanted to do. And nobody was to eat. Nobody was to have water. Nobody was to do anything, right? They were basically making a huge U-turn in their life. And they made a stand right there. And they said, if we do this, maybe God will show us his grace. Maybe. They didn't even know. They started out on a journey right there, right? Recalculated. Didn't even know really where it was going to end or if it was. And they just had faith in God, right? And so the people listened to the GPS, made the U-turn. But when they listened to God's word, they were shown grace. Chapter 4 says that Jonah didn't want to share the message with the Gentiles, right? He didn't even understand, that his God was the God of the entire world. At that point in time, the Hebrews felt that God was their God, right? We're not even into Paul yet, sharing the word and doing his things. And Jonah was angry because God showed him grace and mercy. He'd already forgot about the grace and mercy that God showed him when he was in the fish. He didn't really feel it was a two-way street. I deserve grace and mercy. They do not. And sometimes the GPS is dealing with us, like I said, on the inside. Our compassion and love for all of God's people. And I'm just thinking of a side story right here, I guess. Quick side story. Is that, sometimes our compassion and love for other people comes from spending time with them and getting to know them. And, he's not here now, but I actually had a chance to spend time with Hugo Mendoza. Quite a amount of time, in a car in very close proximity for 10 or 12 hours one day. And I can tell you that my outlook on people who were here, illegally, right, changed that day, right? My outlook on people who were here illegally was kind of, they shouldn't be here. They should be paying taxes. They should be doing something there. They should be they, right? And in reality, all I need to really do is have compassion for them and understanding their stories and what they've been through to get here. And that was a life-changing moment for me. So thank you for again approaching me after church. Run from Terry after church. Hugo needs a ride. So anyway, that was just something, once you develop love and compassion for others, it will enhance your spiritual relationship with God. And I will give that moment, that time spent with Hugo, a big piece of enhancing my spiritual relationship with God. I'm really beginning to just to love people and change my attitude. I guess, we ask ourselves, what is our attitude toward the wicked? Because a lot of wicked people in Nineveh that needed forgiveness. And, do we find ourselves like Jonah, just wanting them to become destroyed? Or would we prefer that they experience God's mercy and forgiveness? What type of person, what do we want them to experience? What do they deserve? And so Nineveh was a wicked city. It's probably not so much unlike the one that we live in here today. Someone said that over the weekend, but they basically said something along the lines of the wicked will walk through these doors, and I was envisioning this door when I said it, right? But they will walk out righteous if we choose to have them experience God's mercy and God's forgiveness. So in closing, basically, it's not something else I had to witness, right? Is that over the weekend, I was in another place, and I was trying to finish this message, and one of the things was, how do I finish this? So I prayed that morning too, like, God, help me finish this message. I know I'm missing the piece that you want me to have. And so I go to church that day in Oklahoma, not even here, and the message was on finishing. So I knew from that point in time where I was going to go. And then I text Derry. Derry said, Pastor Marty's message was on finishing too. Because it wouldn't matter. Yeah, I need all the help in the world, trust me. It's not God's will for us to fail. And if we listen, He's going to help us with our directions. He knows that we have a problem getting to our destination or finishing, right? And we all start out well. Sometimes we just have a problem finishing. And so over the weekend, one of the things I heard was that with every decision to act on God's promise, you'll be challenged not to finish well. Even when we finish, the enemy will challenge and tell you, you finished, but you didn't do it very well. Some of you may go out here tonight and say, we finished the message, but you sure didn't do it very well. Shame on you. So, I guess in the end is that when we make our decision to give our life to God, it doesn't get easier. We're all still living in the same world. We're all still living with the same problems. We're all still experiencing the same pains. But it sure is different. Sure is different. My life over the past couple of years has changed dramatically, and it is maybe not easier. It's not easier to pay the bills. It's not easier to get up and want to go to work in the morning, but it's different. My life is different now because I did choose to give my life to God. And it doesn't get easier. The key to finishing, right? To finishing is the endurance. This was kind of the message that we heard over the weekend. And endurance is a gain, right? The more we do something, the better we get at it. Running, for example. The more you run, the better you get at it. The more endurance you're going to have. You can run further, you can run faster. My little girl, a few weeks ago, Madeline, she ran a 5K. Her first time was 37 minutes. 2 weeks later, she runs a 5K in 31 minutes. Her endurance is great. But the same is true for our spiritual endurance. The more we do, the more we invest, the more we practice, the more we're in the Word, the more spiritual endurance we're going to have. We might not have all the spiritual endurance yet, but we have enough to start, right? You have to actually start the race. You have to start so that you can finish. And finishing is what we want to do. Something along the way, sometimes we get off track along the way. And I probably got off track 100 times just here tonight. But we have to listen to our GPS or our God positioning system because we can always start again from right where we are at. Right? And that's the value of the GPS, right? It doesn't matter if we got off track. It doesn't matter where we are. We can start again right there. We don't have to go back to go. There's no going to jail, no collecting $200 or Monopoly, right? We start again right there. And that's where the GPS is. And in James 1:3-4, it says, because you know that testing of your faith produces perseverance, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Every time our faith is tested, right? Our faith is tested. It gives our endurance a chance to grow. Right? So every time our faith is tested, our endurance has a chance to grow. And we all have the faith that we need, right? We talked about faith in here many times. We all have the faith that we need, right? Faith is small as a mustard seed from each mountain, right? It's endurance that we need. Right, so in order to get the endurance, listen to your GPS, listen to the Word, read the Word, invest in yourself, practice writing, practice in your spiritual relationship, and use your GPS. Make a U-turn.